Look at your screen. The 2026 debt ceiling standoff isn't just a headline. It's a wealth transfer in broad daylight. We like to tell ourselves we're rational actors, smart, calculated, independent. We spend hours staring at green and red candles, dissecting 10K reports, and treating Wall Street commentary like gospel. But here is the brutal reality. You aren't driving your portfolio with your prefrontal cortex. You're being steered by primitive impulses that haven't changed since we were dodging predators in the wild. FOMO isn't just a psychological state. It's a core command, a legacy code in the human operating system designed for survival. But in this era of high-frequency algorithms and systemic manipulation, that code has been hijacked. You think you're a free agent on Main Street, hunting for the next big alpha. You're not. In the eyes of the machine, you are nothing but exit liquidity. Your excitement is their profit margin. Your hope is their exit strategy. They've built a gold-plated cage and convinced you that you hold the key. But what if I told you that the very impulse you've been taught to fear is actually your greatest untapped superpower? What if the fear of missing out is the only thing that can save you? Do you know how to decode the signal? Welcome to the architecture of sovereignty. Today, we don't just observe the game, we hack the players. But before we begin, you need to see the enemy in the mirror. Stop looking at the Fed. Stop cursing at the algorithms. The predator isn't out there. It's the person staring back at you in the mirror at 2 a.m. while you scroll through social media for a sign. We live in the era of cognitive satiety. You're stuffed with headlines, 60-second breakdowns, and pre-packaged opinions from talking heads on CNBC. You feel full. You feel informed. But in reality, you're nutritionally bankrupt. You've mistaken exposure for expertise. Information isn't power anymore. It's the new obesity. We consume this mental junk food because original thought is expensive. It costs calories. It costs time, and it costs the ego the painful discomfort of being wrong. The system doesn't need to hide the truth from you. They just surround it with a million loud, shiny distractions. They don't steal your money. They rent your focus. Every time you buy a ticker because a YouTuber called it a generational play. Every time you panic sell because a tweet went viral. You aren't an investor. You're a passenger. You've surrendered your sovereignty to a stranger's narrative. You are letting someone else pilot your bank account while you sleepwalk through the noise. But here's the terrifying part. Your brain is actually wired to choose this path of least resistance. It's a biological glitch that the 1% have turned into a business model. To understand why your own gray matter is conspiring against your net worth, we have to look inside the skull. Welcome inside the skull, the most sophisticated piece of hardware on the planet running on biological malware. You've been told that dopamine is the chemical of pleasure. That's a lie. In the world of high-stakes finance, dopamine is the chemical of anticipation. It is the neurochemical engine of the hunt. Neurobiologists call this reward prediction error, or RPE. Your brain doesn't fire when you actually make a profit. It fires when it expects to make one. When you see a vertical candle on a crypto chart or an AI startup hitting $1 trillion valuation, your midbrain releases a flood of dopamine, not because you've won, but because you're hallucinating a future win. This is the anticipation trap. The higher the price goes, the more your RPE algorithm demands a bigger hit. You aren't analyzing a P and L statement anymore. You're front-running your own biological cravings. But here is where the trap snaps shut. When that asset hits the top and begins to plateau, your dopamine levels don't just flatten, they crater. Your reward prediction error becomes negative. You feel a physical sense of withdrawal, a hollow ache in your chest that the system translates as panic. This is when you double down. This is when you buy the dip, which is actually a cliff. You are trying to fix your neurochemistry with your credit card. The 1%, the quant funds in Greenwich, and the algorithm architects in Palo Alto, they don't just trade stocks. They trade your RPE cycles. They know exactly when your brain will scream for a hit, and they are the ones selling you the drug at the highest possible price. But if biology is the trap, then math is the prison. Because while you're fighting your own brain, you're also trapped in a game where the rules are designed to ensure you never reach equilibrium. To survive, you have to understand the cold, heartless logic of the game. Finance isn't a team sport. It is a cold, calculated, zero-sum game. For every dollar you dream of making, someone else has to bleed it out. In the boardrooms of Greenwich and the server farms of Palo Alto, they aren't looking at charts. They are looking at game theory, specifically the Nash equilibrium. Think about the 2026 debt ceiling standoff. To the average person on Main Street, it's a political drama. To a game theorist, it's a game of chicken played with trillions of dollars. You stay in the market because you think everyone else will stay in. You tell yourself that as long as the music is playing, you have to dance. That is the rational move for an individual, but it's a death sentence for the collective. This is the Nash equilibrium of a bubble, where everyone knows the crash is coming, but no one can afford to be the first to leave. The 1% didn't build this system to be fair. They built it to be a liquidity trap. They feed you narratives of infinite growth and digital revolutions just to keep you at the table until the very moment they pull the rug. You're playing a game of poker where you can't see your own cards, and the house can see through the back of yours. You aren't investing in the future. You are participating in a calculated collapse. The system doesn't want your intelligence. It wants your compliance. It wants you to stay rational until the trap is ready to spring. But there is a flaw in their game. A way to walk away from the table without losing your shirt. A way to stop being a player and start being the one who owns the board. But to do that, you have to learn how to kill your own biological clock. Stop. Take your hand off the mouse. Right now, check your pulse. If your heart is thumping at over 100 beats per minute, you aren't an investor. You are a biological casualty. You are experiencing an amygdala hijack. At this very moment, your sympathetic nervous system has locked your prefrontal cortex in a basement, and your primitive brain is screaming at you to do something before the chance is gone. This is the exact moment the house wins. To stop being a pawn, you need a circuit breaker. I call it the biostop. It is a non-negotiable protocol for the sovereign actor. Step 1. Biofeedback. If your heart rate is elevated, you are prohibited from executing a trade. Period. You are chemically compromised, as if you were walking onto the floor of the New York Stock Exchange stone cold drunk. Step 2. The 15-minute void. Close the laptop. Walk away from the glass. Get out of the glow of the Silicon Valley algorithms. It takes exactly 15 minutes for that initial dopamine surge to begin its decay. If after 15 minutes, your thesis is still based on hard data and not on the desperate fear of being left behind, then, and only then, do you engage. The biostop isn't about missing the boat. It's about making sure you aren't boarding a sinking ship just because the crowd is cheering. You are reclaiming the most valuable territory on Earth, the 6 inches between your ears. But controlling your biology is only the first layer of the fortress. Because once your pulse is steady, you still have to face a world that is paid to lie to you. To beat them, you have to learn how to strip the skin off their narratives and look at the skeleton underneath. Now that your biology is in check, let's talk about the poison you're being fed every single morning. In the labs of Wall Street, they don't call it news. They call it sentiment fuel. To beat them, you must master the art of alpha decoupling. Most people on Main Street consume information like a cheap fast food meal, greasy, salty, and designed to make you crave more. Alpha decoupling is the process of stripping the skin off the narrative to find the raw, cold, unvarnished bone of the data. Adjectives are the MSG of the financial world. When you hear a reporter on CNBC scream about a historic rally, your brain registers opportunity. When you read a headline about a crypto bloodbath, your brain registers survival. Step 1 of the decoupling strategy: incinerate the adjectives. Strip the word historic. Strip the word bloodbath. What is left? A 5% move, a 3% correction. Numbers have no emotion.
But narratives are built on nothing else.
Step 2. Identify the delta. Compare the raw data to the consensus on Main Street. If the crowd is celebrating a miracle growth, but the raw numbers show a decaying yield, you have found your alpha. Real alpha isn't found in the news. It is found in the gap between what is happening and what the system wants you to believe is happening. You aren't looking for good or bad news. You are looking for the disconnect. This is how the 1% weaponizes your ignorance. They sell you the hype while they harvest the reality. But even with a steady pulse and a clear mind, there is one more trap you haven't seen. A trap that is being laid right now, in the very heart of the American financial system. And if you don't recognize it by the end of this year, your sovereignty won't just be threatened, it will be deleted.
Welcome to the front lines of 2026.
The Silicon Valley gold rush didn't just end, it metastasized into the greatest rug pull in American history. While you were chasing 100x gains on AI penny stocks, the institutional whales were quietly building the infrastructure of your confinement. Enter the Central Bank Digital Currency, the CBDC. The Fed isn't just launching a digital dollar for your convenience. This is a programmable leash. For the first time in human history, the House has a direct, real-time kill switch on your net worth. They've sold you on frictionless payments, while they've built a digital panopticon. In this new battlefield, your money isn't an asset. It's a permission-based entry in a centralized database. If your spending habits don't align with the narrative, if you try to exit the system at the wrong time, your liquidity simply evaporates. The 2026 debt ceiling standoff was the smokescreen.
While Main Street was distracted by the political theater in D.C.,
Wall Street was busy installing the plumbing for total financial surveillance. Your financial sovereignty isn't being stolen by a thief in the night. It is being surrendered by you, in exchange for a smoother user interface. You are walking into a walled garden where the house can delete your winning chips the moment you become a threat to the equilibrium. You think you're a free agent in a free market. No, you are an experiment in a controlled environment. But even in a digital prison, there is a ghost in the machine, a way to reclaim the high ground before the gates slam shut. But to access it, you have to stop being a victim of the system and start being its architect.
the victim mentality is a luxury you can no longer afford.
If you spend your time cursing the Fed or fearing the whales, you've already lost. You are playing their game, on their turf, with their emotions. It's time to stop being a casualty of the system and start being its architect. Financial sovereignty isn't about having $1 billion. It's about possessing the one asset that cannot be programmed, inflated, or deleted: your perspective. When the 2026 crash comes, and it will, the crowd will react like a single, panicked organism. They will follow the code of the Nash equilibrium straight into the abyss. But you have the biostop. You have alpha decoupling. You have the ability to stand in the eye of the hurricane while everyone else is being swept away by the flood. You aren't exit liquidity unless you choose to provide it. You aren't a conduit for profit unless you let them rent your focus. From this moment on,
You are no longer a passenger in the American economy.
you are a value hunter. You are the ghost in the machine that they didn't account for. Real power isn't about changing the global financial system. It's about changing how you interact with the board. You don't need to defeat Wall Street. You just need to stop being their fuel. But there is one final test of your new identity. A challenge that 99% of people will fail because they are addicted to the very noise that is killing them. To survive the next 72 hours, you'll have to do something that feels like professional suicide.
Here is your initiation into the sovereign elite. The 72-hour blackout. For the next 3 days, you will go dark. Zero tickers. Zero social media. Zero financial news. No CNBC. No Reddit threads. No X feeds. To the system, this is professional suicide. To the architect, this is a strategic recalibration. You need to starve the algorithm to feed your intuition. By cutting the dopamine cord, you are forcing your reward prediction error back to zero. You are clearing the static to finally hear the heartbeat of the real economy. If you can't survive 72 hours without checking your portfolio, you don't own your assets. They own you. You aren't an investor. You're an addict waiting for a fix. Prove me wrong. Drop the word sovereign in the comments below to sign the contract with yourself. But remember, the true test isn't when the market is green. The true test comes when the screens turn red, and you're the only one in the room who isn't screaming. Because once you master the silence, you become the most dangerous player in the game. The one who can see the bus coming and has the clarity to either step aside or hijack it. The machine is still running. The debt ceiling is still looming. But for you, the strings have just been cut. Welcome to the other side.